You know, I never cease to be amazed and delighted by my friends in the plant kingdom. A little while ago, I was talking to an expert in carnivorous plants who assured me that though they look really exotic, some of his pitcher plants were hardy enough to be grown outside in the bog garden. Well, you know what these southerners are like, they don't know what a proper winter is. But I was prepared to try, so I planted them here in my bog garden next to the pool, and last winter we had more than 5 degrees of frost. But sure enough, this spring, up they've come again, and now they're producing some beautiful pitchers. These are modified leaves, of course, but one of them's even had the gall to flower. So if you've got a bog garden, I can really recommend them. They'll certainly amaze your friends anyway. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time at Barnsdale today because I'm off to the 2nd International Flower Show at Hampton Court. They've got some great gardens there this year and some good practical ideas. But first of all, there are a couple of jobs I must get done. I reckon that Swiss chard is one of the most valuable vegetables in the garden, and its cousin ruby chard is even better because it's also highly decorative. Now, this is really a spinach substitute, I suppose, but it has these lovely succulent stems as well, which makes it even better. But the great bonus is that it's hardy, so you can keep pulling it right through the winter. Now, I raise mine in these plastic modules on the patio because that's the way to get a really fast turnaround of vegetables. But you can still sow them now. But the one thing to remember is that this goes to seed quite quickly. So you must make sure that you thin them out so that you've got the plants no less than a foot apart. And of course, the great thing about this ruby chard is that it's decorative enough to go in the flower borders. It's going to look really nice against these petunias. And that, of course, is the real essence of this, the ornamental kitchen garden. In a garden like this, you should be able to grow most of your flowers, fruit and vegetables while still having a garden that looks a knockout. Well, if you want to know more about it and you missed the original series, it's being repeated on Mondays at 1:50, starting next Monday, July the 15th.
For most gardeners, garden design still has something of a mystery about it. And it's only at the big showcases like Chelsea or Hampton Court that they come across the work of professional garden designers. But they themselves recognise there's a difficulty in making their work accessible. How do you, for instance, convey to someone the potential of their own garden site? Well, Rill Noel is just such a garden designer, and she's got tremendous experience in designing gardens of all sizes, from small, intimate courtyards to vast, lake-filled landscapes. And she's confronted this problem head-on. And at her home here in Sussex, she's created what is, in effect, a living portfolio of her work.
2 years ago, it looked like this. We decided there was a golden opportunity to create 3 gardens here so that visitors could come and take ideas, not copy, but just take ideas from the 3 gardens they see.
And you actually break garden design down into several different aspects, don't you?
Yes, I like to think of garden design not as plants and furnishing, which most people think, but in terms of design, construction, planting and furnishing, which are very much the 4 elements of composition.
All right, Rill, I'm one of your clients and I'm looking for advice on garden design. How are you going to start?
Well, I'm going to find out about you and what you want to achieve in your garden. I'm going to look at your home and I'm going to look at your lifestyle and your environment, your soil aspect, your existing vegetation, and see if I can marry what you would like with the reality. The character of your house will be very important, and the materials that are used around it. In this particular case, we have a cottage-style building with very small windows and bricks, which give you the sense of a small scale. And therefore, this area that we're sitting in here is of small scale, and the pattern of the paving is small, and the planting around it is cottagey. You'll notice that the Achillea and the Alchemilla have encroached on the path. I'm now going to lead you and show you my golden heart.
And I see the plants you've used here are evergreens, so clearly there's all the year-round interest.
Oh, absolutely. The most important thing in the garden is to have the structure right so that the flowers can come and go, but you're always left with a permanent structure.
Something different here again, I see. The use of these tiles on edge is very attractive.
That's right. To create a focal point, they're absolutely ideal. They radiate out so beautifully.
Yes, they're almost like the rays of the sun, aren't they? And they're very appropriate in the golden heart of the garden.
Absolutely. Now I'll take you down to show you the levels of the garden, the lowest level. What a pity we didn't take this to Hampton Court.
Steeper.
Steeper.
Yes, a bit fragile, though, to transport.
Well, I have tried it, but usually they break by the time I arrive.
And running water down here?
Yes, we've used this level to show water because water is always happiest at a low level. And we have a natural spring that comes in over behind the wall, and eventually there will be a circulating pump taking the water through to the trough, and visually people will connect it with this pond, I hope.
A rather graceful young lady. Well, here you've obviously got a naturally sloping site to give you the levels, but would you ever introduce artificially a change of levels in a flat garden?
I suppose I would, but only if the garden was enclosed. You've always got to be very careful when you change levels, because you must remember that if the environment is flat or it is completely different from the garden, you must be careful not to make the change look artificial. We're lucky because we have 1.5 meters difference between the top and the bottom, and it gives us a golden opportunity to use the levels to display different materials, different planting, different furniture, without seeing the other level.
And this has a different feel anyway, because we're now influenced, if you like, by a different building, aren't we?
Absolutely. This garden relates to the barn, and all the paving and the planting has been put in with that in mind.
And there, beyond the water, a line of screening plants.
That's very important because I wanted to get a feeling of containment here, and that screens the swimming pool. This is very much an enclosed garden. And beyond the plants, you'll glimpse the trellis, a very beautiful trellis. And here we've used it as a partition, and it relates very well to the third garden, which is a garden relating to the wider landscape. And here you see everything in a large scale, the planting, the furniture, the softer colours, so that it doesn't jar against the background, looking out to the Wealden view.
It does make so much more sense when you can see it in splendid reality, rather than just trying to interpret a two-dimensional plan. Well, Rule Noel calls her garden gallery Cabbages and Kings, and it's open by appointment. But perhaps other garden designers will begin to follow her imaginative example. After all, making good garden design more accessible must be in every gardener's interest.
North London may not be the sort of place you'd think of as the centre of gardening, but as we discovered when you wrote into us, gardening problems crop up all over the country. And it was from here in Southgate that Minnie Linden wrote into us about something which is worrying a lot of you: suckers. It's not just prunus trees which cause these problems, but many others as well. Minnie, how bad is the problem?
Well, as you can see, these are plum suckers here. They're from a tree that was taken down about 18 months ago, and all these suckers keep coming up.
And what have you tried to do about it so far?
First of all, I tried to dig them up, and since just mown the lawn, and it seems to have proliferated.
Well, digging up will certainly help if you can manage it, but often they go in inaccessible places. But unfortunately, when you drive the lawnmower over the top, you tend to make the situation worse, because every time the mower blades pass over the surface roots of the old tree, they nick them, and you get even more suckers coming up. The problem tends to be far worse than when you started. What you really need to do is treat them with one of these weed killers which contain ammonium sulfamate. Unfortunately, it's totally unselective weed killer, which means that it can potentially damage most of the plants in the garden. So what I've done is made a cardboard collar which you can then fit over the weed or the sucker so that it actually sticks out. You can then protect the grass, then simply paint on a solution of it. Obviously you don't want to do it just before it rains, because it will wash it all off. It's a very good thing, this, because it doesn't just kill off the leaves, it actually is carried down into the root as well. So it'll gradually help to kill that off.
Well, if you think that's a problem, Pippa, I'll show you a real problem. And this is it, Pippa.
Well, you've gone part of the way, Minnie, by digging them out. I can see why you gave up, because there's certainly an awful lot of roots down there. But the very fact you've dug them out is a great help, because you can see here all the roots that all these suckers are growing from, and all you now really need to do is to make some more nicks in them, break into the surface of the bark there, and then all you have to do is either paint those cut surfaces with some of that ammonium sulfamate solution, or you can actually put on the crystals direct before you even dissolve it, and just spoon some of them into the cuts that you've made, and that will kill it off. We'll move along the root a bit more as well, so it'll have quite a good effect. And you'll need to obviously do several in a row like that. Yes. It'll take quite a while for you to see the effect, probably a couple of weeks. And of course you can't safely replant in the area for 8 to 12 weeks. But by the end of that time you'll be able to grow what you really want in the border.
With such a diversity of shapes, sizes and colours, it's easy to forget the simple beauty of the wild rose, just 5 petals and a bunch of golden stamens. You can see these growing in the hedgerows, but there are dozens of lovely species which we can grow in our gardens for flowers and foliage and for autumn hips. When you consider how many centuries it's been in cultivation, it's hardly surprising that the history of the rose is steeped in a mixture of fact and fantasy. Well, whether you want to come here purely on a fact-finding visit, or if you just want to enjoy roses at their best, this is the place to be. The Gardens of the Rose, headquarters of the Royal National Rose Society at St Albans. Rosa gallica is one of the earliest roses in cultivation. It was possibly introduced by the Romans, and it's called the apothecary's rose because it was grown for medicinal purposes. It's also red and may well have been the red rose of Lancaster in the Wars of the Roses. Rosa mundi has striped blooms. It's a sport from Rosa gallica, and on this plant, 1 or 2 of the flowers are reverting to the colour of its parent. Rosa alba was the other rose in cultivation in the Middle Ages, possibly the white rose of Yorkshire. And this one, Rosa alba maxima, is called the Jacobite rose because it was Bonnie Prince Charlie's emblem. Someone who has made a study of their history is Rosarian Hazel LaRougetel.
Well, I think those 2 varieties you've mentioned, the alba and the gallica, where the roses red and white always mentioned in medieval accounts of medieval gardens. And we then had 3 other types of old roses that we have to consider. The damask, which had lovely scent, which evolved in the eastern Mediterranean. And those were the roses used for attar of roses and perfume generally. The damask, all these old roses only flowered at midsummer for 6 weeks, but there was one exception with the autumn damask, which did repeat, and so it has been used for breeding since. And if you ever see a rose with Rosa damascena in its parentage, you'll know it's going to have a good scent. And then the 4th development were the centifolias, developed in Holland, 16th and 17th centuries. These were the big cabbage-like roses. And the 5th type was the moss roses, which came as a sport on the centifolias. So up to 1800, we have 5 beautiful classes of old roses. They were all full-petaled, rather flat in form, no high centres like our modern roses, and they had no yellow in them. There were every shade of pink, white, and deepest red, deepest maroons. Lovely colours. I love those old ones particularly. And so they grew their roses, and by the end of July, they'd gone. Blown was the old term. Then, at the end of the 18th century, came a rose revolution. Traders in China, particularly around the port of Canton, discovered roses flowering on into the autumn. They brought home 4 very important roses, which, crossed with our old summer flowers, produce a wealth of new blooms in Victorian times. with the properties of long flowering, a greater depth of bloom, and different colours. A lovely buff yellow came in. These were shown in the bourbons, noisettes, hybrid perpetuals, a little group called polyanthus, and the tea roses. The tea rose is very important because one of them, crossed with one of the hybrid perpetuals, produced the first hybrid tea, the rose that has outclassed every other type of rose, in 1867, a hybrid tea. Another important development in Victorian times were the polyantha, little clustered roses, which in turn gave rise to our floribundas, or cluster roses today.
Now, old varieties of plants often come under threat and could become extinct. How can we be sure that these lovely old varieties of roses can be preserved for future generations?
Well, we very much hope that everybody who is interested in all varieties of roses should become a member of the Royal National Rose Society's new Historic Roses group. And through them, we hope to conserve our national flower, the rose.
The Edwardians loved growing these rambling roses. They get their vigour from Rosa witturiana, and just look how this one's gone right up into that huge conifer. Pretty vigorous, so if you've only got a small garden, perhaps you'd be better off with something that grows a bit more slowly, like a climber, for instance. And it isn't just old roses. There are modern ones here by the thousand for every conceivable garden use. In fact, the collection is expanding so fast that the Society wants to get more acres so it can house them all. And they're making rose history here too. On these trial grounds, they're testing tomorrow's new hybrids. And who knows, something like this could be tomorrow's #1 hit. The next step after the trials is to bring the plants into public domain. And this week, the Society is holding its British National Rose Festival at Hampton Court. And it's here that rose growers from all over Britain, and from overseas too, are put on their mettle to show the world just what they can do. Well, unlike Chelsea, which is a spring show and where the roses have to be forced, this one coincides with natural flowering time. And all the blooms you see here have been fresh picked from the fields, so they should look exactly here as they would do, or could do, in your garden. There are hundreds of the more traditional kinds here, but the trend for smaller patio roses and ground cover roses is still very much on the increase, and there's now a really wide range of colours available. But it's also lovely to find one that is not only an attractive pink, but has a gorgeous scent as well. But as well as showing established breeds, this is the launching ground for a number of brand new varieties, some of which will be available to gardeners later this year. And here's a yellow newcomer that looks pretty vigorous to me. I like the way the foliage contrasts with the flowers too. And if you want something bright and breezy for a patio rose, what about Claire Rayner? Look at the stripes on those petals. And rather gentler in colour, here's a new patio rose that has caught some of the characteristics of the older varieties. And how about this one? Good, strong, mid-pink in colour, clean foliage, and the most delicious, bewitching fragrance. Well, artists have been illustrating roses for centuries, and this year the Royal Mail is producing a new issue of special stamps featuring roses. They won't be released until the 16th of July, but if you want to come and have a look at a preview, they'll be here amongst the real roses at Hampton Court.
But of course, the International Flower Show is much more than roses. This is the second year of the show, and this year it's twice the size. And that's good news for gardeners. It's estimated that 200,000 people will visit the show over its 4 days, and you could be among them because it's open tomorrow and Sunday. There are lots of good gardening ideas here and some wonderful gardens. This one is by Peter's Gardens and is a real lesson in cool planting. And how about the novel waterfall? These are roofing tiles turned upside down. That garden would cost about £15,000 to have built, but here's a feature that you could build yourself for a fraction of the price. This little patio here is reached by a flight of steps made with old railway sleepers, and I reckon that would cost you round about £25. And about the same price too for the wooden decking, which you could buy as second-hand floorboards from the demolition contractor. The most expensive part of the whole job would be this little arbour, which you could get from the garden centre for about £100. The pool is really delightful. This is just made with a black butyl liner, and note the waterfall, which is nothing more than a beech log with the rotten centre hollowed out. You don't need to get complicated and expensive for these features. And then the pool runs underneath this little wooden bridge into a wildlife pond. And the important thing to note here is the pebble beach. It really is essential to have a gentle slope so that any wildlife that gets in the water can get out again. Shows like this always bring out the celebrities, all revealing their personal passion for gardening. Princess Michael of Kent, who opened the show, is a keen gardener. And over lunch, she swapped horticultural experiences with celebrities from the world of entertainment. Mike Aspel, June Whitfield, Patty Boulay and Ernie Wise all have a love of plants in common. Many of them are here to add support to a favourite charity. And for Cliff Richard, it's Action Research.
I get invited to support a number of projects, and I'm really happy to do that because people in my position have, well, we're in a fortunate position, aren't we, to be able to support things that are actually doing valuable work for people in our society and even around the world. So for me to be involved is really easy. It's no sacrifice at all.
Now, wasn't it designed as well by children?
Yes, I mean, it was, wasn't it? Because it's always hard to think whether children could ever put their minds to anything. But seeing a thing like this, you realise that there's always talent in people, even from a very early age. And it's really nice to think that we're sitting here amongst the ideas of the very young. People wrongly think that there are some things that are hip and cool and other things that are not. And it's really nice to get a concept that is as old as the hills and find that young people are not only interested in it, but actually can participate and actually offer something.
You've been hip and cool for quite a few years. Would you say gardening fits that category?
Oh, completely. Everything does, as long as you do it your way.
But the one that really appeals to me is the Help the Aged garden. It was designed by Robin Templar Williams for an active retired couple who've discovered the secret that it's the gardening that really keeps you young. This area is designed formally for relaxing and entertaining friends. And the borders show you that you can make your garden as time-consuming or as labour-saving as you want. Because if they're filled like this with scented roses, there won't be a lot of weeding to do. And over here, there's plenty to do in the productive area. A small greenhouse provides hours of pleasure on the colder or the wetter days, and it provides plenty of tomatoes too. There's an area for fresh vegetables for the kitchen and for herbs too, and even a place where you can grow cut flowers for the house. Wendy Craig, you're very much associated with Help the Aged and another great garden here, but why do they do gardens at shows?
Well, I think it's a very good way to promote the name Help the Aged. Thousands of people are going to come here. They're going to see the garden and it's going to register in their minds, Help the Aged. And it impinges. People who are retired, they've got time, haven't they, to spend in their gardens. It's a lovely hobby. But also I think being outside in the fresh air and doing work keeps you young and fit. Also it gives you a sense of achievement and a lot of pleasure.
Wendy, just cast your mind forward about 60 years or so and tell me, when you retire, is this the sort of garden you'd like to retire to?
Oh, this is a lovely garden. I mean, you can work as hard as you want to or as little as you want to in this garden. I'd quite like to retire to this garden any time you say.
The show is sponsored by British Rail's Network South East, and do bear in mind that it's actually cheaper to get in the show if you come by train. And so it's appropriate that there should be a railway garden. The garden itself is full of good ideas, and the trains add that extra touch of excitement. Altogether, it's a garden to delight railway children of all ages. But what really makes these sort of shows exciting for me are the plants. Here you can see exotic flowers like the delphiniums, the sweet peas, and all kinds of exotica. But the trend these days is back towards the cottage garden style. And if it's ideas on plants and planting that you're after, then this is the place to get them. Southview nurseries have a mouth-watering display of all kinds of cottage garden plants, and joy of joys, they're all labelled. They include, amongst many other things, some of their specialities, like the old-fashioned pinks. Things like the lovely Rebel's Lady Warncliffe, which is really quite an old one, and others that just look and sound old, like Gran's favourite, though that was actually introduced in the 1960s. And do bear in mind that, unlike Chelsea, here you can actually buy the plants today and have them gracing your own garden tomorrow. Two new hardy varieties of osteospermums have caught my eye. The silvery white Sunny Boy and his deep pink sister, Sunny Girl. If you have low fences in your garden, you could cover them with a close relative of the orange peel clematis. Clematis orientalis helios forms four-pronged stars of yellow and grows to no more than about 4 feet. Valley Clematis Nursery always comes up with something new, and this time it's the delightful Clematis fusca violacea, which will form a small spreading bush for the border. But if you want ideas on how to use plants, you've really got to see them in a garden setting. And Rill Noel has brought some of her plants up to Hampton Court to build a real English garden. She's calling it And Is There Honey Still for Tea? Rill, I love the garden, and I know you particularly wanted to build it here at Hampton Court. Why was that?
Well, I love the sense of space here. There's plenty of room for people to walk through the garden, see how we've used plants and paving. There's a croquet lawn, a clock tower, but more than that, there are ideas, design ideas for people to take home and use in their own gardens.
Well, next week there's no Gardener's World, but you can enjoy an evening of music from the Proms instead. We're back the week after, of course, at the same time, where there'll be gardens to visit and plenty of practical information from Barnsdale. Goodbye.